everyone, welcome back to new video. And in this video we're gonna create weather application in Kotlin Multiplatform. During this creation of project we will learn a lot of things, like we will learn about Koin dependency injection framework, we will learn about Ktor Client, and also we will follow here clean architecture pattern so that our application is more robust, more scalable, maintainable and testable. If we're talking about our application, so first we will take permission from the user. Once we receive the permission, we fetch the location coordinates, and based on that location coordinates we will get the information from our API. So in this video we will follow open weather map API, and at last we will show the information to our user. So this is our application. Now without wasting any time, let's get started with our project. It's a very important project for those who never did Kotlin Multiplatform. So let's start our journey with KMP. So first go to the description box where you can find my initial project GitHub repository link. Download the project and open up into your Android Studio. In this project I gave you all the dependencies that we will use throughout this project. So open up your shared module Gradle file, and in this Gradle file I have already added all the dependencies for the common main, for the Android main and for the iOS main. Open up your Android app module, build Gradle file, and in this I have already added all the dependencies that we will use for Android platform. Okay, so now it's time to begin with our project. So first thing first, I'm gonna show you the API that we will consume throughout this project. So this is our website, openweathermap.org. So first thing first, create an API key for yourself, and after that we will consume these two APIs. So this first API is actually used to get the current weather information based on the latitude and longitude. So I'm gonna copy this response, come back to our project, and in our common main source directory I'm gonna create here 3 layers because we will follow clean architecture. So first layer is data layer, then we have our domain layer, and lastly we have our UI layer or the presentation layer. So in this data layer I'm gonna create a directory, and the directory name is model. So in this model directory I'm gonna put all of my model classes. So right click on it, new Kotlin data class file from JSON. This is a third-party plugin using which you can convert your JSON response into Kotlin model classes. So simply paste the JSON object, and I'm gonna call this weather response generate classes. So it will generate a lot of model classes for you. Open up your weather response, and in this weather response we are not using all of these parameters. So I'm gonna remove the parameters that we will not use. So we are not using this, and also we are not using time zone and visibility, so remove it, and also remove this wind. So for the main I'm going to convert this name from main to main DTO because these objects are used to transfer the information from a remote data source to our mobile device or to our application. Similarly for the sys, just rename this thing from sys to sys DTO. And also from the weather I'm gonna change this name from weather to weather DTO. Okay, so this is for the first type of response, and also remove all of the things that we will not using for this response. Remove this wind too. Okay, so now go back to our API endpoint. Now it's time to copy this response that we are receiving from this forecast API endpoint. Come back to our project, and in this model I'm going to create a directory, and the directory name is forecast. In this forecast I'm going to create all of my model classes, and this time I'm going to call this forecast response. So open up your forecast response, and in this we are receiving list, but we don't have any type in here because in this data class we are not having any name. So just give a name, and I'm going to call this forecast DTO, and in this data class I'm going to call it forecast DTO. Go back to your forecast response. In place of empty list type you can pass forecast DTO. Remove all this thing because we are not using this. Remove this message too, and in this forecast DTO we are not using a lot of parameters like this cloud, then DT text, then pop, rain, and also we are not using visibility and wind. So in place of main I'm gonna use my main DTO that we have already have. In place of sys I'm gonna use sys DTO. Just import it. In place of weather we will use weather DTO. Alright, so we are pretty much done with our data classes. Just remove all of the things that we are not using. Okay, so we are pretty much done. Now it's time to integrate our API. So in this data layer, I'm going to create a directory, and the directory name is remote. In this remote, first I'm going to create my HTTP client. So this is an object naming Ktor Client. We are having here a variable naming client. This is initialized with the help of HTTP client, because we want to transfer, or you can say share, the information in a form of JSON. So first we have to install content negotiation, and we want to negotiate our content with JSON. So simply use here JSON. This contain a parameter JSON. So if you want to put some extra information that you want throughout this JSON response, you can do that thing too. So for me, I'm using here JSON, and I want to ignore all of the unknown key. So this is our HTTP client. Now it's time to create our API service. So this API service is a class, and in this class we have to pass our client, which is HTTP client. In this we are having two functions. First function is actually used to fetch the current info. So current weather information. For that we have to pass our latitude and longitude, and this will return us weather response. Return API, not return client dot. In this we are having get method, because we want to get the information. So for that we are going to use HTTP get method, and in this we have to mention our URL information. So first we are going to use our host. So for that I'm going to copy this endpoint, come back to our project, and simply paste it over here, so that it's very easy for us to take the reference. So this is our host. Copy this host, paste in here. Next we are having path. So in place of path we're gonna pass from data to weather. Lastly we are having parameters. So simply use here parameters dot append. So the parameter name is latitude, and in place of latitude simply pass your latitude, stringify it. Next we have parameter append long. Simply use your longitude and stringify it, not double, just stringify it. Lastly we are having parameter, and in this parameter we have to pass our API ID or app ID. So app ID. For this, on the top I'm gonna create a private const while naming app underscore ID. Just pass it over here. So from this we are receiving a body, and the body type is nothing but weather response. Okay, so this is for the first function, which is actually used to get the current weather information based on our latitude and longitude. Next we are having one more function to get the forecast information. Pass your latitude and longitude. This will give us forecast response. Return client dot get method. Use your URL, go back to the API endpoint, copy this endpoint, come back to our project and paste in here. So in place of host I'm using the same host that we were using for the first function, which is get current weather info. So simply use this host. Then we are having path. So in place of path, copy this part of endpoint, paste in here. Lastly we are going to append few parameters. So first we are having latitude. Pass your latitude, convert this thing into string. Next we are having parameter append for the longitude, stringify it, and lastly we are having parameters for our app ID. So in place of this simply pass your app ID and replace your app ID with your specific API key. So for me I'm simply cut out this API key and paste in place of empty string. Okay, so we are pretty much done with our API service. Now this will give us body, and the type of this body is forecast response. Alright, so we are done with our API service. Now it's time to begin with our domain layer. So in the domain layer, first we have to create a few directories. First is model, then we are having repositories, and lastly we are having use cases. So let's begin with our model. So in this model I'm going to create data class first for the current weather. we are having here the country name. Next we are having temperature, type is string, and lastly we are having our icon URL. Now I'm going to create one more data class, and this time we are having forecast. In this forecast we require date, type is string, then we have to use temperature, type is string, and lastly the icon URL, type is string. Okay, so now it's time to create our repository interface. So I'm going to call this weather repository, and in this we have to create two functions. Suspend function get current weather info. We have to pass our latitude, type is double, then we are having longitude, type is double. So this will give us weather. Next we are having one more suspend function which is actually used to get the forecast info of upcoming 5 days. Pass your latitude and longitude. This will give us a list of forecast. Okay, so we are done with our interface with the repository. Now it's time to write the implementation. So for that, in this data layer, I'm going to create a directory, and the directory name is repository. In this repository, we're going to create a class name is weather repository implementation. Okay, so in this, first we have to pass our API service, because without API service we are not able to fetch the information from the backend. And lastly, it will implement the weather repository. Alright, so API service dot get dot current weather info, pass your latitude and longitude, and simply return it. So the problem is this API service will give us weather response, but my requirement is weather. So let's write few mapper functions. So in this data, I'm going to create a directory naming mapper. In this mapper, we have a file naming mappers. Now in this mapper, I'm going to create an extension function over weather response. Naming is to domain. This will convert our weather response into weather. So a return weather. In this weather we have to pass our name, or you can say country name. Next we are having our temperature. So this temperature is coming from this dot main dot temperature. So by the way, this temperature that we were receiving from the backend is coming in the form of Kelvin. So we have to convert this Kelvin into Celsius. So for that, just minus 273 and convert this thing into a string. Lastly, we are having icon URL. So from the backend, we are receiving the only icon ID. So we have to convert this icon ID into proper image URL. So let's create a function get image URL, pass your icon ID. Now it's time to use it. So get image URL, pass your icon ID. So this dot weather dot first icon. Alright, so now it's time to use it. Go back to your weather repository implementation and use here to domain. Now we have to write this second function implementation, API service. So in this we are having forecast info, pass your latitude and longitude. But the problem is same. We are receiving from the backend forecast response, but my requirement is list of forecast. So let's write mapper function. So in this mapper, we are having one more function which is a extension over forecast response dot to domain. This will convert forecast response into forecast. This list write a transformation with the help of map function. So in the forecast we are having date, which we will pass later. Then we are having temperature. So this temperature is coming it dot main dot temperature, simply minus 273. Convert this thing into string. Lastly, we are having icon URL. So get image URL, pass your icon ID, which is it dot weather dot first icon. Okay, so now it's time to write a function which eventually convert the time that we are receiving from the backend in a form of epoch time, convert into proper date format so that our user can understand the date. So for that, I'm going to create here expect function format date and pass here millis that we are receiving from the backend, and this will eventually give us the formatted date. Now it's time to write the implementation for this expect function, or you can say actual declaration. So I want to write the declaration of this thing in Android main and iOS main. Okay, so first we have to write implementation for iOS main. So simply open up iOS main. So let's start with our iOS main. So first thing first, we are going to create a formatter with the help of ns date formatter. I want to use here apply scope function, which is used to update our date format. So in this date format, I'm gonna pass my format that we want. This is our date format. Next, we are going to mention our time zone with the help of ns time zone dot local time zone. Now it's time to convert our millis into proper ns date. So we are having a variable naming date, and in this I'm gonna use ns date. Millis, I want to multiply this thing into 1000 so that it will become a proper timestamp. Convert this thing into 2 double. And lastly, I'm using my formatter and convert this date in a form of string, or you can say formatted string. Pass your date in it. So this is the implementation for our iOS. Now it's time to write the implementation for our Android. So simply copy this format, go to your Android main data mappers.android.kt. So here I'm gonna create formatter with the help of simple date format. Pass the format type formatter dot format millis, multiply this thing with 1000 and convert this thing into double and return it. Okay, so now go back to your mappers, use format date and pass your time in millis, which is it.dt. Convert this thing into long, return it. Now go back to your repository implementation and use it in here. Okay, so now we are pretty much done with our repository implementation. It's time to create our use cases. So first use case is get current weather information use case. Now in this class, first we have to pass our repository. So weather repository. And in this I'm gonna create our operator function invoke, pass the latitude, type is double, then we are having longitude, type is double. A return type of this thing is result, and this result will contain the weather. Return try catch, because this is an API call, so sometime it will throw an exception. So I'm using here result.failure, and in this I'm gonna pass my exception. If it is not the case, that means we are receiving the information from the backend. So weather repository, get current weather info, pass your latitude and longitude, and lastly wrap this thing in result.success. Simply pass your response. But the thing is, this get current weather information is a suspendable function, so we have to make our operator function suspendable. So remove this function. Yeah, we are pretty much done with our use case. Now it's time to write the second use case. So get forecast information use case. Now in this class, first thing first, we have to inject weather information, weather repository, not information. Operator function invoke, pass your latitude and longitude. Return type of this thing is a list of result, type is a list of forecast. Return try catch result.failure. In this failure you can pass your exception. If it is not the case, we are receiving the response with the help of weather repository get forecast info lat long. Result.success, you can simply use your response, but the thing is, this function is suspendable function, so make sure to use here suspend. Alright, so we are pretty much done with our domain layer. Now it's time to write our UI layer. So in the UI layer, mostly view models are there. So let's create our view model. I'm gonna call this weather view model. So in this class, first thing first, I'm gonna extend my view model because I want to inherit all of the properties of view model in it. Next, I'm gonna create a function. So get current weather info. For that we have to pass lat long. I'm using vModel scope, launch a new coroutine, and in this we are going to use our use cases. So for that, let's inject our use cases. So private wall get current weather info use case. Next we are having private wall get forecast info use case. So get current weather info use case, invoke, pass your lat long. So this will give me a response. That is a type of result, type is weather. So if our response is success, then I'm gonna update my UI state, else I'm gonna again update my UI state. So for that, let's create our UI state. So UI state is nothing but a data class, and in this we are having three things. First we are having error, initial value is empty string. Next we are having current weather, type is weather, initial value is null. Next we are having forecast info, type is a list of forecast, not forecast response, it's only forecast. Initial value is again null. So on the top I'm gonna create here private wall UI state, initialize the thing with mutable state flow, and in this I'm gonna pass my UI state. Next we are having one more UI state that is actually used to expose our UI state information. Convert this UI state mutable state flow into normal state flow so that it is not mutable. Okay, so if it is a success case, I'm gonna simply update my UI state. In this update, I'm gonna create a copy of my previous UI state, and here we are receiving current weather info. So it's time to update our current weather info with response.getOrNull. And if it is not the case, if we are receiving any error, on that case I'm gonna again make a copy of our previous UI state, and in place of error I'm gonna pass my response exception or null and stringify it. Okay, so next function is actually used to get forecast information. Pass your latitude, longitude, launch a new coroutine with the help of vModel scope.launch. Use response get forecast info use case and invoke it by passing lat long. So if our response is successful, on that case I'm gonna update my UI state. So make a copy of our previous UI state, and in place of forecast info you can simply use a response get or null, else update your error string. So UI state update, make a copy of our previous UI state, and in place of error simply use a response dot exception or null and stringify it. So that's it for our UI layer. Now we are going to set up Koin dependency injection framework for this project. So first thing first, I'm gonna create all of the modules that will require. So let's begin with our data layer. So in this data layer, I'm gonna create a directory naming di. In this di, I'm having a file, and this file name is data module. We are having a variable, and this variable name is again data module. I'm going to create a module with the help of module function. So first I'm going to create a factory, and this factory will provide us our HTTP client. So with the help of Ktor Client we are receiving that. Next I'm going to create a factory which will provide us API service. So API service, and the requirement of this service is client. So I have already added the way to provide HTTP client. So simply use here get. Next I'm going to create a factory. This will give us the weather repository implementation. So with the help of weather repository implementation class will provide that. Simply inject API service in it. So this is our data module. Now it's time to create domain module. So for that, just create a new directory naming di, and in this di I'm having a file, and this file name is domain module. Create a variable naming domain module, and in this use factory. So first factory will provide us use cases. So this first factory will provide get current weather information. So get current weather info use case, requirement is weather repository, simply use get. Next we are having get forecast info use case, provide this weather repository. So this is our domain module. Now it's time to create UI module. In our UI module, we are going to create a module that is used to inject view model in both platforms. But injecting view model or providing view model in both platform, we are having a different approach. So for that reason, we are going to create one expect function naming shared view model module, and we're gonna implement that expect function in both platform one by one. So in our UI, we are having one directory naming di. In this, let's create a file, and the file name is UI module. We are having expect function shared view model module. Return type of this thing is module. Okay, simply press Alt Enter, add missing actual declaration. So add in Android main and in iOS main. So let's write implementation for our iOS. So here I'm going to create a private while view model module with the help of module. I'm using a single create our weather view model, not repository. Simply inject your use cases one by one. So remove this pair of parentheses, and here I'm going to use my view model module. Just below to it, I'm having an object name is provide view model. Use Koin component interface in it. Create a function get weather view model. Because we are not able to inject this view model directly in our iOS application, so for that we are going to create an object, and using this object we're gonna inject view model into iOS app, and this will return us weather view model. Use here get. Okay, so that's it for our iOS implementation. Now it's time to write implementation for our Android. So go to our Android private wall view model module, and use in here module view model quantifier, and in this use your weather view model, inject your use cases, simply return it from here view model module. Okay, so now we are pretty much done with our Koin dependency injection for shared module. Now it's time to set up Koin dependency injection framework for both platform one by one. So let's begin with our Android app. So for the Android app, we are going to create a base application class. So in our Android main, I'm going to create a class, and this class name is base application. Extend this thing with application class. In this we are having on create, and in this on create I'm going to use start Koin, and also we will attach all of the modules. So first module is our data module, then we are having our domain module, and lastly we are having our shared view model module. It's time to register this base application into our manifest. So open up your Android app module source Android manifest, and here just register your base application. So we are done with our Koin dependency injection framework setup for Android. Now it's time to set up Koin DI framework for our iOS application. So open up your iOS main module, and here I'm going to create a directory naming di. In this di I'm having a file, and the file name is Koin DI setup. Having a function naming init Koin, start Koin, simply register your modules. So first module is our data module, then we are having our domain module, and lastly we are having our shared view model module. Okay, so now it's time to use this thing. So simply open up your iOS app from here. Again open up iOS app, go to iOS app.swift, use here init, and in this blog I'm gonna use my Koin DI setup kt.do init Koin. So this name comes from the interoperability. So basically this Kotlin shared code will be converted into Objective-C. So these are the namings that is present in our Objective-C code. That's why I'm using here Koin DI setup kt.do init Koin instead of using Koin DI setup.init Koin. Okay, so that's it for iOS setup. So now we are going to take the location permission for both platforms. So due to that reason, we have to create an interface, and this interface must be implemented for both platforms. So that interface present in our shared common main module. In this UI directory, I'm going to create one more directory, and the directory name is permission. In this permission, I'm having a interface, and this interface name is location service that contains two functions. First function is permission granted, which actually tell us whether permission is given by the user or not. Next, we are having request location permission. So through this you can request location permission. In this we are having a parameter, and the parameter name is granted. Input of this function is boolean and output is unit. At the bottom, I'm going to create a data class which is actually used to hold our latitude and longitude. So val latitude, type is double. Next we are having our longitude, type is again double. Okay, so now it's time to implement this location service. Let's begin with our Android platform. So in our Android main UI package, I'm going to create one more package naming permission, and in this permission I'm having a class, and the class name is Android location service. So this will eventually use our location service, implement all of our functions that we have in location service. So first we have to check whether permission is given or not. So we are going to use here context. So create a variable naming context in it, and also I'm going to create one more variable naming launcher, which is a type of activity result launcher. Type of this thing is string. So first just return whether permission is granted or not. So you can check this thing with the help of context compat, check cell permission, pass your context, and next the permission string. So Android manifest permission access file location. If it is equivalent to package manager.permission granted, that means yes, we are having the permission. Next we have to implement request location permission. So here I'm using my launcher and simply launch that permission pop-up. Android manifest permission, and permission is access file location. Alright, so we are done with the implementation. Now in this I'm going to create a function naming get location. This is a suspendable function which will give us location, and here I'm using suspended coroutine, and in this suspended coroutine lambda we are receiving the continuation. Okay, so if you want to get the location in Android, we'll use fused location provider client. So on the top I'm having a variable of type fuse location provider client. Initialize this thing with a lazy block because I don't want to initialize this fuse location provider client until and unless we'll use this variable. So if you want to initialize this fuse location provider client, you'll use location services dot get fuse location provider client and simply pass your context in here. Now let's use it. Fuse location provider client dot last location, and we are having here add-on success listener which will give us location, and next we are having add-on failure listener. And I'm sure that if we hit get location function, on that case we are having the permission of access file location. So due to that reason I want to suppress here missing permission. So missing permission. Alright, so now here we are receiving the location in our add-on success listener. So I'm using my continuation and resume my suspended function execution with result.success. We're gonna pass here location. So this location is coming from location.latitude and location.longitude. And make sure to check this location is never null. So just check it. Location, if it is not null, then only we will resume. Okay, so I'm sure it will never null. So if you receive the failure listener, on that case I'm using my continuation resume with exception, and in this I'm going to create a new object of our exception and pass a message unable to get location. And yeah, we are pretty much done with our Android location service. Now it's time to begin with our iOS location service. So go to your iOS main module, and in this UI directory I'm going to create one more directory naming permission, and here I'm having a class, and the class name is iOS location service. Use your location service, override those two functions is permission granted and request location manager. So if you want to play with location in iOS, we are having one thing, location manager. So let's create a variable of our location manager, which is CL location manager. First, we're gonna check whether the permission is given by the user or not. So for that, I'm having a variable naming status, which is initialized from location manager dot authorization status. If our status is equivalent to KCL authorization always, or if our status is equivalent to KCL authorization when in use, that means yes, we are having the permission. Remove this to do. Now it's time to implement this function, request location permission. So for that, again, I'm gonna create a variable status, initialize this thing with location manager authorization status. Now we will check if our status is equivalent to KCL not determined, I mean authorization is not determined. On that case, I'm using my location manager and initialize its delegate. So in order to initialize our location manager delegate, we'll require one class. So let's create it. Private class location delegate. I'm gonna pass here a lambda granted. Extend this thing with ns object and also implement one interface. So we call interface in iOS as protocol. So the protocol name is CL location manager delegate protocol. In this, we have to override one function naming location manager and make sure to choose location manager function which has parameter manager, which is CL location manager, and did change authorization status. Okay, so remove this super call, use in here when. So when our did change authorization, if it is a type of KCL authorization always or KCL authorization when in use, that means yes, we are having the permission. So simply use your granted lambda. So if you want to use this granted lambda here in this function, so just use a wall in front of that. So granted invoke, yes, we are having the permission. Next, if it is a case of else, I mean if the status is not of these types, that means we don't have the permission. So use granted and invoke it with false. So this is our location delegate implementation. Now simply create an object of location delegate and pass your granted in here. Now it's time to show the consent screen to our user. So location manager dot, we are having a request when in use authorization. So what it will do, it will simply show a consent screen or the location pop-up to our user. Alright, so we are pretty much done with it. Now it's time to create one function which actually used to get the location. So get location, return type of this function is location. Location manager dot location, we are having coordinate in it, so use these coordinates, use contents. So we are having a problem, and the problem is this is an experimental foreign API, so use annotation over here. So sometime it may be null, so use your question mark, same as here. Now in this we are receiving our location latitude and longitude. So location, simply use your latitude and longitude, and lastly return it. Okay, so my requirement is location, but here we receive location nullable, so use here nullable type. Okay, so yeah, we are done with our iOS location service. So now it's time to begin with our Android application. So in our Android app, go to this Android app module, open up Android manifest, and in this manifest, make sure to add this permission for internet, access course location, and access find location. Lastly, add this uses clear text traffic true, because if you don't add this particular line into your manifest, it will create some time problem with Open Weather Map API. Okay, so now it's time to begin with our UI. So go to main activity, and in this main activity, I'm going to create a composable, and the composable name is weather application. Requirement of this weather application will be our view model. Okay, so now I'm going to create a variable which is location service. Initialize this thing with remember mutable state of. So the type of this mutable state is Android location service. Initial value is null. Now it's time to import everything. So import this remember and also convert this wall to var. Okay. Next, I'm going to create a variable naming permission. Initialize this thing with remember launcher for activity result. Pass your activity result contracts dot request permission. This will give us a boolean variable. Okay, so we are done with our permission. Next, I'm using launch effect block, and this launch effect block will trigger only one time. So first I will initialize my location service with Android location service. Pass your context in it and our activity result launcher. So let's create context with the help of local context.current. So once we are having our location service, just use your location service and use request location permission. So what it will do, it will simply show a pop-up to our user, and if user gives the permission, on that case this particular block will trigger. So if our bool, if it is true, on that case we are receiving the latitude and longitude. So just use your location service dot get location and store this thing into location naming variable. Get location is a suspendable function, so make sure to use here scope. Initialize this thing with remember Kotlin scope. Within this bool variable scope, just launch a new coroutine and make sure to launch this coroutine dispatcher.io. Now cut this thing from here, paste in here. Okay, so now we are having location. So if our location is not null, on that case I'm using my view model and simply get current weather info, it dot latitude, it dot longitude. Similarly for the forecast, so view model get forecast info, pass your latitude and longitude. Okay, so now we are pretty much done with this initial fetching logic. It's time to begin with our user interface. So in the user interface I'm having a column, modifier is fill max size. Next I'm going to create a variable naming UI state, which is initialized from view model.UI state, and I want to collect my mutable state flow in a form of state. So use here collect as state with lifecycle. So if our UI state is error, is not blank, that means we are receiving some error from the backend. On that case I'm having a box having modifier fill max size, content alignment is on the center that contain text, and this text is used to show us the error message. Okay, so if it is not the case, that means we are receiving the actual information. So we have to check if our UI state dot current weather, if it is not null, that means we are receiving our weather information. On that case I'm going to create first the image, then the state name, and lastly its temperature. So for the image I'm using glide image, and in place of image model I'm gonna use my weather dot icon. Now it's time to use modifier. So modifier width is 200 dp, import this dp, and when we're talking about the height, so height is 100 dp, and on the top I'm gonna use here spacer, modifier height of 64 dp. Okay, so that's it for our glide image. And one more thing, in this column I want to add background color. So this background color is of type sky blue color, and also I want that horizontal alignment of this content which present into this column is on the center. Okay, so yeah, we are done with our glide image. Now it's time to make some space. So use spacer dot height, let's say 24 dp. Okay, so this is our glide image. So now it's time to show the temperature of this country. So for that I'm using here text, and this text contain the weather dot temperature plus space Celsius. So basically it's represented degree Celsius, and this time I am giving the style material theme typography headline large. Copy this thing, and my font size is 60 sp. Import this sp. Again make some space, modifier height of this spacer is 24 dp. Instead of 24 dp use 12 dp. Next we are having a text. So this time this text will show us the country. So in this we are having name. Style of this thing is coming from material theme typography, and this time I'm using here headline medium. Alright, so that's it for our current weather. Now it's time to show us the information about forecast, which will be coming in upcoming 5 days. So for that I'm using UI state. In this we are having forecast info. Just check if it is not null, that means we are receiving the list. And here I'm using a lazy column, and in this lazy column I'm gonna use modifier fill max width. So this lazy column contain item, which is a text, and this text will show us the upcoming forecast. Style of this thing is coming from material theme, typography, headline, small, and also I want to give the color. So color is coming from color dot white. Okay, similarly also I want to change the color of our text that we were using on the top. So simply copy this stuff here, headline medium, just copy this, paste it in here. Similarly for this text, just paste your color. Alright, so now it's time to create our list item. So for that we are having here items function, and in this item function I'm gonna choose item function that has parameter a list of type T. Now I'm gonna pass my list. So in this item I'm gonna create a row having modifier fill max size, but before that I want padding. So horizontally I want padding of 12 dp and vertically I want 8 dp. Now fill max width, and within our content also I want padding. So horizontally 12 dp and vertically it's 4 dp. And if you're talking about the vertical alignment, so I'm using here center vertically. Now in this row I'm having the date, then the temperature, and lastly the icon. So for that I'm using here text. So this text is actually used to show us the date. So this date is coming from it dot date. Next I'm using here spacer having modifier weight of this spacer is 1f. Then we have one more text. So this text is actually used to show us the temperature. So it dot temperature plus space Celsius. Again I'm using here spacer having modifier weight is 1f. Lastly we are having our icon. So for the icon I'm using here glide image. In place of image model I'm gonna use my icon URL. Next we are having modifier. So modifier, if you're talking about the size, so size is 30 dp. And yeah, we are pretty much done. Lastly I'm using one more spacer to provide some space from the end. So here I'm using width of 12 dp. That's it for our row, and I want to color this row. So for that I'm using my background, and in this background I'm passing white color. And if you're talking about the shape, so shape is a rounded corner shape of 12 dp. And yeah, we are pretty much done with our UI. Now it's time to use this weather app in our surface. So just use your weather app, pass your view model. So create your view model with the help of Koin view model. Type of this view model will be weather view model. Initialize it with Koin view model. Now pass it. Alright, so we are done with our Android app. Now it's time to execute this application. So I'm going to execute this in our Pixel 7a API level 33. And make sure to use your API key in place of app ID. Alright, so our app is executing. Now I'm going to give the permission. Okay, so here we are having a problem. Problem is forgot response doesn't have serializable annotation. So we have to annotate all of our data classes with serializable annotation that we will use during this conversion of our JSON response into this model classes. So make sure to add serializable annotation on top of every data transfer object or responses. So go to main DTO, simply add serializable annotation on top of this. Similarly for the sys DTO, and similarly for the weather DTO, and also do the same thing for weather response. One more thing, in our forecast DTO, remove this sys DTO because we are not using it. And now it's time to execute our application one more time. Alright, so here we are having one more problem. Okay, so I think I forgot one place to add this annotation. So let's see. weather response DTO sysdto. Okay, so I haven't had this serializable annotation on top of our forgot response. Re-execute it. Okay, so this time we are receiving the data or information. Now it's time to format our float up to 2 decimal places. So let's do that, and also we want this item present in the center and have some space vertically. So let's do that. Go to our main activity, and in this main activity first let's do the formatting thing. So here in the bottom I'm going to create a function. So this function is actually used to format our double or float into up to 2 decimal places. So for that I'm gonna call this format value and simply pass my float. So it will return string, and here I'm using string dot format up to 2 decimal places. So I'm using here percentage dot 2f and pass our float value. Simply return it. Okay, so in the first parameter you have to pass our local dot default. So I'm using here local dot get default. Now it's time to use it. So on the top we have our main text, which is this one. So simply use first for this weather temperature, wrap this thing with format value. So we are receiving temperature as string, so simply convert this temperature into float and now it will work. Similarly, we have to do the change for our lazy column list item. So here in place of temperature, just cover this thing with format value and convert your temperature into float. And yeah, we are pretty much done. One more thing, we have to make this text on the center. So for that I'm using here modifier fill max width and give the text alignment on the center. And also we need few space. So on top of this I'm gonna add spacer modifier height of 24 dp. All right, so yeah, I think we are pretty much done. Make sure to give this space from 12 to 20. And yeah, we are pretty much done. Now I'm going to re-execute my app. All right, so here you can see now we have our decimal or float value up to 2 decimal places. And this is our upcoming forecast information for 5 days. Alright, so that's it for our Android app. So now it's time to begin with our iOS application. So if you want to consume state flows in iOS app, we are having few util files. So I'm gonna put all of the util files in our common main module. So in the common main UI directory, I'm gonna create one more directory and I will call this utils. And in this util, I'm gonna create a file and the file name is helper. Now I'm gonna paste the code. Okay, so this is the code. What we will do, we will simply convert our state flow into common state flow. This is an extension function that is used to convert a normal state flow into common state flow. Now go to your view model. So here we are having our view model. Just use here common. That's it. Okay, so now it's very good time to start with our iOS application. So just open up your iOS app directory into Xcode. Alright, so in this project I'm gonna create one group. So right click new group and the group name is utils, and in this util I'm gonna create a file. This is a Swift file and I will call it helper. And also I'm gonna put few codes into this in order to collect those state flow or common state flow. So this is the code. Now it's time to begin with our view model wrapper. So for that, again, I'm going to create a new group, and this time I will call it view model. And in this view model, I'm going to create a class. So new file. This is a Swift file, and I'm going to call this weather view model wrapper. So in this first, I'm going to import my shared module. Now I'm going to create a class and the class name is weather view model wrapper. This is an observable object. So simply extend this class with observable object. Now in this I'm having a variable and this variable name is view model. Type of this view model is weather view model. In init block I'm going to initialize my self dot view model with the help of provide view model shared get weather view model. And one more thing, I'm gonna create here a published variable naming UI state. Now this UI state is initialized with the help of UI state dot init. In place of error, I'm gonna pass empty string. In place of current weather, I'm gonna use nil. In place of forecast info, I'm using nil. Or in place of nil, you can use, I'm using here nil. Okay, so now it's time to create a task. So variable task. Type of this task is task. Return type of this task is void and it will never throw any kind of exception. Now in its init block, I'm gonna initialize my task with task. So task is nothing but a kind of way in iOS using which you can perform your task on the background. So I want to execute all of this task on the main thread. That's why I'm using here main actor. We are receiving here a weak self reference. Okay, so now it's time to collect our state flow that we are having in our weather view model. So for that, first I'm gonna check my self. If our self is not equivalent to nil, then only I will proceed with it. So here we are having a wait. Next, I'm gonna use my collect function. So collect, make sure to choose collect that we are having in our helper.swift file, which is this one. So in place of common state flow, we will use our self unwrap this thing. This will have view model that contains UI state, which is nothing but a common state flow. And in our on each, we are receiving the value one by one. So value in. Now it's time to update our UI state that we are having here. This one. So let's do it with the help of self dot UI state, update this thing with value that we are receiving on every emission. Now I'm using a D init. So once we done all of our operation, I'm gonna use task and simply cancel all of the task. That's it for our view model wrapper. Now it's time to use this view model wrapper into our user interface. So let's make some space in here. Okay, so now everything works well. So now it's time to create our user interface. So for that, I'm gonna create a new group and I will call this UI, and in this UI, I'm gonna create a Swift UI file. So we are having new file naming Swift UI view, and I will call this weather app or weather view. Create it. So in this, first I'm gonna create a observed object variable, and the name of this thing is view model wrapper. So here we have our weather view model wrapper. Next, I'm gonna create one more variable of our iOS location service. So type of this thing is iOS location service. So this is present in our shared module. So simply import it. Import shared. Now initialize this thing with iOS location service. Okay, so remove this text with Z stack. And in this Z stack on appear function, I'm gonna perform some operations. So first I will check if iOS location service is permission granted. So if we have permission, then we gonna perform some operation. If we don't have, then we have some another operation. So if we have the permission, then I'm using a variable location naming, and in this location I'm using my iOS location service. With the help of get location, we will collect the location, and next we have to check if the location is not equivalent to nil, then I'm using my view model wrapper dot view model, and this view model content function get current weather information. So in place of latitude, I'm using my location, unwrap this thing, pass the latitude. Similarly, we are having location, unwrap this thing, pass the longitude. View model wrapper, view model. Next we are having our forecast information. So get forecast info. In place of latitude, use location, unwrap it, pass the latitude. Next location, unwrap this location, pass the longitude. Okay, if it is not the case, then what we will do, we use iOS location service request location permission. So in this granted we are receiving value. So if our value dot bool value, if it is true, that means we will receive the permission. So once we get the permission, what we will do, we will do the same thing that we did over here. So simply copy this stuff and paste in here. Okay, so this is the operation that we will perform when our ZS tag appears. Now it's time to begin with our UI. So in the UI, I want my background to be blue. So I'm using here color dot blue, edges ignore safe area all. So what it will do, it will simply color my background with blue. And next we will check the condition. So if our view model wrapper dot UI state error, so if it is not empty, that means we will receive some problem and I want to show the problem. So use here text view model wrapper dot UI state error. Okay, so this is a case of error. If it is not the case, on that scenario I'm using my view model wrapper, then UI state, and check its current weather. If it is not equivalent to nil, that means we will receive all of the current weather information. So I'm using here vstack, and in this vstack, first thing first, I'm using async image. So make sure to use async image that has 3 parameter URL, content and placeholder. So use this one. So first I'm gonna create a URL. So this URL is coming from our view model wrapper dot UI state dot current weather, and I'm sure this is not nil. This will contain our icon URL. Next in the content we are receiving our image. So image in, I want to perform some operations. So image dot resizable, and I want to give the size. So with the help of frame we will do that. So in the frame we are having width. So in width I'm using here 100. In place of height I'm using here 100. So in place of width I'm gonna change this thing from 100 to 200. Next we have placeholder. So in place of placeholder I'm using simple progress view. So that's it for our async image. Now it's time to show the temperature. So for that I'm using text, and in this text I'm using my view model wrapper dot UI state current weather, and I'm sure this is not null. In this we are having our temperature, so simply show the temperature. Next we are having font, and in this font I'm using system and give the size. So size would be 60. Next we are having its weight. So for that we have to use font weight, and I'm using here bold. Next we are having color. So in order to give the color, use foreground color and use white here. Okay, so this is our text that will give us the information about the temperature. Just below to it we have to show the country. So for that we use again my view model wrapper UI state current weather. This will have name in it, font, and again I'm using here system size, and this time I'm using 40. Next we are having font weight. So I'm using here font weight medium. My foreground color is again white. Okay, so these three information will be coming from our current weather. Alright, so now we are done with it. Next I'm gonna check my view model wrapper dot UI state. This will contain our forecast information. So forecast info, if it is not equivalent to nil. Okay, in this case I'm gonna render all of my list item. So for that we are having here scroll view. So I want to wrap everything within this scroll view. Now in this scroll view, first I'm gonna create a text, and this text will say us upcoming forecast info. Font is type of title. Next we are having font weight. So font weight is again I'm using bold here. Next we are having foreground color, which is white. Okay, next I'm gonna use a lazy v stack, and in this lazy v stack we have content. In this content I'm gonna use for each, and in this for each I'm using my view model wrapper UI state and forecast info, and I'm sure this is not null, but if it is a case we are receiving null, on that scenario I'm gonna simply use empty list. Next we are having here id, so in place of id I'm using myself. Now we are receiving one by one items in this lambda. Now it's time to render all of our items. So for that I'm using here h stack. In this h stack we have text. This text is coming from item dot date. Then we are having spacer. Again we are having our text, and this time this text is coming from item dot temperature. Again we are having spacer, and lastly we are having our icon. So use here async image. In place of a URL I'm gonna use my item dot icon URL. In place of content we are receiving our image, and I want to perform some operations, so image dot resizable. Next we are having frame, and in this frame I'm gonna provide width of 30, height is also of 30, and lastly I'm gonna use here clipped. In place of placeholder I'm using again my progress view, so progress view. That's it for our async image. Now I want to add padding. Then I want to also give the frame size. So in this frame I want to pass my width, which is infinity, and my alignment is starting from the leading. I want my background to be white. Next I want to change this shape. So with the help of clip shape I'm gonna use here a rounded rectangle with corner radius, and I will pass here 12. Lastly I want padding horizontally of 12, and also I want to give the size of our lazy v stack. So in the frame we are having width, and in place of width I'm gonna pass infinity. In place of alignment I'm using this time top, and lastly we are having our scroll view. So this is our scroll view, and in this scroll view I'm gonna attach frame. In this frame we are having width of infinity. Alright, so that's it for the user interface. Now it's time to use this weather view in our iOS app.swift. So simply go in here and use weather view. One more thing, when you want to take this location permission, we have to add few information in our info.plist over this file. So I will do this thing in our Android Studio. So open up your iOS app. This will contain info playlist, and at the bottom I am gonna add few lines. So here you can see I have already added. So this key string, this information is used when users see the location permission pop up. So this string will be used over there, and this is pretty much equivalent to our Android manifest uses clear text traffic true. Okay, so yeah, now it's time to execute our iOS application. Alright, so our app is executing. Now I'm gonna give the permission. Okay, so we are receiving the data, but the UI is not good, and also our temperature is pretty big string, so we have to wrap this thing up to 2 decimal places. So let's do that and also fix the UI bug. So this UI bug is coming because I'm not putting all of this if else block in our vstack. So simply cut this if block and paste in our vstack, which is this one. Okay, so yes, we are done with our UI fix. Now it's time to create a function which actually convert your long string up to 2 decimal places value. So for that I'm having a format function, and in this format I'm gonna pass my string, and this will return us string. So first thing first, I'm gonna create a float from this string variable, and lastly I'm using string, and in this string we are having format. So in place of format just use %.2f and pass your value, which is float, and return it. Okay, so I think we have a problem. Unwrap this value. Okay, so now it's time to use this format function. So first on the top we have our temperature. So in this wish tag we have this temperature, so simply wrap this thing with format. Okay, similarly we are okay, so we have a problem, and the problem is okay, so we have to mention this string. Okay, similarly in our h stack over here we are using a text which is used to show the temperature, so simply wrap this thing with format and here use string. Alright, so now it's time to re-execute the application, and this time you can see we don't have any problem. Okay, so if you want to see this image a little big, what you can do, you can simply change the frame width height. So let's do that. So in our async image here, just use 200 height, re-execute it. Okay, so now it will look little big. And yeah, that's it for our video. I hope you like this video. In this video we saw how to take location permission, how to get the location coordinate, and based on that how to actually use Ktor Client and hit backend API to get the responses. So yeah, that's it for this video, and if you do like this video, subscribe my channel and also write your comment, and you can also fuel up my creativity by clicking the first link in the description box. Alright, so we will meet in our next video where we will discuss something new about KMP or Android. Till that, goodbye.